you can see my screen.
Yes, Prof, I can see your screen.
Okay. So I trust everybody can see the screen.
Yes, I think so.
Great. So I'll be switching off my video just in the next few minutes. So we're going to be having a workshop this afternoon for about 2 hours on introduction and literature review, but I want to put it the other way. It should be literature review and introduction, because you cannot write that introduction without having looked at some literature for you to understand, to have at least an understanding of the topic that you are dealing with. So my name is indicated earlier on is Daniel Majgira. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Mechanical Engineering Science here at the APK campus of UJ. I hold a doctorate in mechanical engineering, and also I'm professional registered with the Engineering Council of South Africa. Why I'm mentioning that is because in the next couple of years, anyone who's doing engineering will be expected to be registered with, or be required to be registered with the Engineering Council of South Africa. You cannot practice engineering in South Africa without registration with EXAM starting in April next year. So it's a legal requirement. So this workshop is going to focus a lot on literature review, because that's the foundation of any research. Before I do that, maybe in terms of credentials, for those that want to know why I'm sharing with you this afternoon. At this stage, I've graduated more than 5 PhDs and more than 30 master's students. I've got more than 200 refereed publications. So I know a little bit. I wouldn't say I know everything about literature review, but I know certainly a bit about literature review. So that's why I'm here facilitating this workshop this afternoon. So I'm going to switch off my video. But before we begin, I want to ask, obviously, for this workshop to be arranged. There is obviously some issues that maybe participants might be experiencing in terms of literature review, are not sure about, and so on. So I want to get a couple of questions, maybe 1 or 2 people, to just indicate the kind of challenges that they face with literature review, so that as we go through what I've prepared for this afternoon, we'll try to address some of those issues. Yeah, so you're welcome. I can see raised hands. You're welcome to raise your hand if you want to make a contribution. John, over to you. John, you can unmute and you can ask your question. It looks like your microphone is not working. If the microphone is not working, you're welcome to just pop a chat. A question in the chat.
Okay, yeah. Good morning. I think it's working now.
Unmuted you. You can proceed.
Okay.
Right. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Prof.
Good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon. I'm so sorry. I'm trying
Great.
to.
It's all right. No, it's okay.
Admit I'm in the West African time, but no, I'm actually in the Central African time. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Prof. Thank you so much for the organizers, the library, for organizing this, and the faculty as well. One of my biggest problems regarding literature review, I think I can say I pride myself as a very good finder of knowledge, but I get lost in the habit of finding knowledge. Say I'm searching for things in the XYZ angle. When I drive into X, I begin to find X exponential 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, and I realize I'm literally like 2-3 months into that place without even concentrating on the other areas, and that comes with a bit of anxiety and frustration as well. And I don't know, what are the ways that you can advise on how one can approach literature review in the right way without getting lost in looking for things. I'll give a practical example. I'm so sorry for taking so much of time. Practical example in terms of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Carrying a literature review on cluster formations in the automotive space. And when I drive into the automotive space, I'm literally driving into innovation in the automotive, then things that are not yet to come, then creating new gaps in the automotive space without even looking at other areas. So I would like to know how I can be able to make things proper without going off the rails. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, John. And I think a lot of people share that experience and frustration as well. Anyone with any question or any issue to highlight? Okay, I don't see any hands, but as I said, as we proceed, you are welcome to pop a question in the chat. Kosi, I see another. Okay, I think that was John. Okay, that's fine. That's the question that he was raising. I was just looking at the question in the chat. Right. So as we start, welcome to those that are joining. My belief is that if you are registered for a postgraduate study, you are more than capable of succeeding in that study. Like Roosevelt says, if you believe you can, then you're halfway there to achieving it. So if you are registered for postgraduate masters, it means you have cleared a lot of hurdles in your life. You should be able to clear this hurdle as well. So this workshop will be geared towards ensuring that we try to assist you as much as possible to make that journey a little bit easier. It won't be, it's not an easy journey, but certainly we can try to point at things that we can do to make it a bit easier. Okay, so this afternoon I've structured this workshop, and I suggest that we have more of an engagement than just a lecture. I want to sort of like start by looking at what postgraduate research is, because it then gives us context in terms of the purpose of a literature review in any postgraduate research. Related to that, I'm sure all of you know that when you're conducting literature review, they always say you need to do critical analysis. So I want to see what that critical analysis, and of course, it's related to any postgraduate research that is done. And then we look at what is literature review and why do we need to do it. You cannot do postgraduate research without literature review. Literature review is at the center of any postgraduate study. Then we are going to spend quite a bit of some time on how you do literature review. I've got my own approach of doing it because I'm in mechanical engineering. Some of the things that I might be talking about might not be very maybe directly applicable, but I think it establishes the foundation and the concepts on which literature review needs to be done. Then towards the end, we'll look at how to write an introduction or proposal to any given research topic, and then we'll close. If there are any aspects that you think I might be missing out in this outline, you are more than welcome to pop a chat in the chat box there, or you can raise your hand and let's have a discussion as we go through this. Right, so starting point, what is postgraduate research? I'm sure most of you, I see there are some who might not be exactly doing postgraduate research, but the majority of you certainly are conducting postgraduate research. So the question that then arises, if you were not sure, if you just said, let me just go and register and see what this thing is about, we need really to understand what postgraduate research entails. I will try to explain as we go the difference between a dissertation. Okay, we can start with mini dissertation, minor dissertation, and then we've got a full dissertation, and then we have got a thesis. There's a big difference between a dissertation and a thesis. I'll try to highlight that as we proceed, so that we as we discuss, although we're discussing postgraduate research in general and literature review in general, the requirements and the expectations when it comes to whether you're doing a mini dissertation or a thesis will certainly be different. So as you are aware, the idea of postgraduate study stems from studies following your graduation from an undergraduate degree. Of course, there might be gray areas here and there. Typically, you need to have an honors then to go to postgraduate in my domain, but there are certain cases where an honors is considered, postgraduate. And this postgraduate study, it generally refers to some kind of advanced level studies that go beyond your undergraduate bachelor's degree. In my space, we've got a 4-year degree program, so we don't call that postgrad, although one is graduating with an honors degree. We only start to talk about postgrad when we're talking about masters, NQF level 9, for those that are in South Africa. And entrance into that requires, of course, an NQF level 8 qualification. In some quarters, this is also known as higher degree research. What it does is it allows one to develop and deepen their knowledge and experience within a particular field of study. So it means that by undertaking a major research, you are in the process of developing that knowledge and deepening your knowledge within a particular field. And this, within the academic environment, this happens under some kind of supervision. Let me just get a laser pointer here. So you have some kind of academic supervision. If it's an applied research kind of research, you at times would have, industry supervision as well. So that's the main reason why one would do a postgraduate research. Now, coming to, I'll talk about dissertation for now, dissertation and thesis. A dissertation is conducted for one to demonstrate that they've mastered. That's why we call them master. They have mastered the scientific investigation methodology. There is no specific requirements for a dissertation to contribute to new knowledge, which is a bit different in terms of thesis. When you are doing now a PhD thesis, the expectation is that you should be contributing to new knowledge. So a thesis must contribute to new knowledge. A dissertation, what we call a master's dissertation, for example, requires one to demonstrate mastery of the scientific investigation methodology. And we're going to be looking at some of those, but focusing mainly on literature review. So a postgraduate student should then demonstrate critical analytical skills. So it's no longer, I'm going to be talking about this later on, it's no longer just a consumption of knowledge, consumption of information. There must be a critical element to it. So that critical analysis skill must be demonstrated, must be shown. And you demonstrate this through the ability to gather and synthesize data or information, and also literature from a wide range of sources. So when you conduct literature review, we're not expecting you to get only information from one source. There must be a number of sources, and what that does, it gives you the ability to get a very good picture in terms of what is happening in the field of study. Okay, what are the key issues? What are people investigating? What are the questions? What are the outstanding issues within that topic that you are studying? So this literature is at the core of your research. You will not understand what other people are researching if you do not conduct this detailed literature review. And part of this, I know most of the assessors will say, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So for you to avoid reinventing the wheel, you need to be able to be aware of what other researchers are doing in the field. Okay, there's an element of critical analysis that I've just given there. This entails one, deeply examining and interpreting. Let's talk in this case because I talk about literature review. Interpreting a text or a concept to gain deeper understanding of its concepts and implications. So any topic that you might be researching on, there are certain fundamental concepts that are involved, and a lot of people are doing research in that particular space, and you need to be able to understand or interpret the implications of any research that is being done. So when you conduct literature review, someone will indicate to you, you are missing critical part of the review. We're going to be explaining what that means. But it's this critical analysis is central to any postgraduate work. So it requires one to thoughtfully examine all the underlying, let's say, assumptions, arguments, and evidence with a view to determining the validity and significance. And while I'm talking about this validity and significance, it's not everything that is published out there that is valid or is significant to one's work. So it's really important to have that critical eye for you to be able to discern what is valid and what is not. And that's why it is quite important in some cases, not all, but in the majority of cases, to try to avoid internet-based sources. And I've got to put quotation marks there. I'm referring to websites, not published work. If you are getting published work for a journal, through the internet, it's fine. As a matter of fact, most of our sources are now through the internet. But look, when you decide to cite a website, there must be a very good reason why, and you need to have checked that website to make sure that the information that you are getting from that website is valid and is significant. We are going to be talking about that in the next few minutes. How do you check the validity of this particular information, and how do you check that it's significant? So the key point at this stage is not everything that is sitting on the internet that is valid. So you need to be able to check that. And it is, when you're talking about critical analysis, it's very deliberate. It's a deliberate action that you have got to take, and it forms a central part of postgraduate research. So as you go through your postgraduate studies, whether you're looking at analyzing data and so on, you need to look at that with a critical eye. Does this make sense? Is it valid? How does it compare with what other people have obtained and so on? Those kind of questions will then polish your ability to critically analyze whatever information is presented before you. So in this case, this critical analysis moves one from being a mere consumer of information. It's no longer just about consumption. And you now need to start developing and putting across a point of view in relation to the issue under study. Okay, so when you do a literature study, when you present whatever you're finding, it's not just an issue of presenting what is out there. There must be an element of you critically analyze that information and putting across an opinion. But of course, it needs to be based on what you are presenting. So developing this critical analysis skill is really critical to any postgraduate study. If you're doing postgraduate study, you need to be able to put across this critical study, and it must be evident in the way you communicate your work. So part of the expectation where you start to look at this critical analysis in literature review, there's a tendency in most cases to just read an article and regurgitate what the article is presenting without properly analyzing that that article to say this information that is being presented, as I said, is it valid? Is it of significance to the work that I'm doing? And I'm going to be emphasizing this as I go through this. So in terms of literature review, this is a survey of scholarly sources. These are scholarly sources on a particular topic. So this specific topic is the topic that you're working on in terms of your postgraduate studies. It provides an overview of the current knowledge, which allows you to identify any relevant theories and methods and gaps, especially gaps. We always talk about gaps in literature, so that you can apply that to your work. So the literature study is not just for one to gain knowledge or to know what is out there. It's critical that as you go through this literature review, you are able to get something from the literature review that you're going to apply into your own research. So I'll try to paint this picture as we go along. So a good literature review doesn't just summarize sources. It also analyzes, synthesizes, and critically evaluates to give a clear picture of the state of knowledge on the subject. Okay, so that critical evaluation again is important. That word critical is quite important for any postgraduate study. You need to demonstrate that you can critically analyze information, not just to regurgitate information that you're getting from somewhere. So there's that element of critical analysis that needs to come through. Its primary purpose, of course, in terms of literature review, is for one to build a solid foundation. And of course, not just build that foundation, but to identify opportunities for new insights, developing your own new ideas in terms of progressing the research work in that field that you're studying. So when it comes to PhD, you need to have with this understanding, with your critical review, to start to identify where are the gaps that you can add knowledge to. So because it's critical, a thesis will not pass without that element of adding new knowledge to the body of knowledge in the field of study. Right. So key issues here on this particular slide: you need to be looking at relevant theories in your field. You need to be looking at methods. You need to be looking at gaps. You need to be building this solid foundation and identifying opportunities in terms of research gaps in the study that you are undertaking. Right, so in summary, the purpose of a literature review is first of all, when I'm reading a literature review from a master's dissertation or a PhD thesis, I need to see that the person who is communicating is familiar and understands the topic of study and its scholarly context. So when I'm reading, it should not be like I'm just taking something from the literature and reading it to myself. I must be engaging with the thought process of whoever is writing that particular dissertation, especially with a view to identify where the gaps are. That literature review also then helps one to develop a theoretical framework and a methodology for the research, which means at the end of this research, as you develop your research methodology, as you design your experiments, and so on and so forth, whatever you're going to do is founded on or building onto what has been identified in literature. So you develop your own theoretical framework and methodology on which it also helps, towards the end when you start to get your results, you can look back and say, oh, these results that I'm getting is similar to what so-and-so got. Therefore, they must be valid. They must be good results. And it enables also the positioning your own work in relation to what other researchers are doing. And of course, there's lots of theories out there, which theory is best supported by the results that you are getting. You must show how your research addresses a specific gap in literature and obviously contributing to the discussion and the debate that is happening in that particular field. And when you get to do a good literature study, you're able to evaluate the current state of research and demonstrate your knowledge. You need to demonstrate your knowledge of these scholarly debates that are happening in the topic, and what are the significant findings are in your field. And you need to develop, of course, your own ideas around the topic. And it is this critical analysis of literature that enables you to build those strong ideas around your topic that you can test, whether through experimentation, through modeling, whatever it is. You are building on what is already in existence, in some cases using tools that have already been developed by other people, verifying, what other people have done for specific applications, and so on and so forth. So the list is endless, but this is a summary of what we are looking at. So I'm not sure that there are any questions or comments at this stage in terms of what I've just covered before we get into the details of conducting a literature review. Okay, I don't see any hands. I don't see any comments in the chat. Okay, so I will proceed. But okay, John, you can go ahead. Oh, I'm not sure whether it's the same John, because there are two Johns here.
Yeah, it's the same John that asked the first question. Okay, my question is tailored around sources. I do understand that it is very important to use peer review sources because they're more reliable. But my question is, in a situation where you are looking for industry-related data, will sources coming from the likes of PwC, Deloitte, would they be considered reliable sources from your industry research companies like your PwC, Deloitte, and the likes that conjure data for specific industries?
Yes. So we'll be talking about that in the next few minutes. So well-verified data, audit data and data that is coming from certain organization. Let's say ESCOM, for example. The data that they post there would have been verified. So it's not arbitrary posting. So when you get that data, you can cite it. If you are going to cite, let's say, a standard from X, instead of just citing the website, you might also cite the actual document that has been published by the organization that you're trying to cite. So in that case, you are dealing with important data. I see Zhidzai, I think you had a question earlier on. I thought it was the same John, but do you want to post your question on the chat, Zhidzai, if your mic is not working? Or maybe I can ask Nkosi to disable that mic.
Thank you, Prof. My question was to disable my mic was disabled, so I wanted it to be activated. It's now active. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I thought you had a question. Okay. So how do we do literature review? I've got an outline here of, I'm going to be going through each one of these one at a time, so that we sort of like understand the process. Again, it's not a silver bullet, it's just a guide. You need to fine tune it in terms of what you are studying. The first thing, obviously, you can't do literature review without the literature. So you need to search for publications. Okay, I'm going to be talking about the points at the bottom of that in the next few minutes. Once you have got those publications, then you need to evaluate the sources. Okay, and this evaluation can take many different forms, but it will also include you deliberately choosing the right keywords for you to search. So you search for the literature, you collect it, sitting on your laptop or whatever, whether you have printed them or whatever, you have them. You now need to evaluate those sources, and you can do it in layers. Once you have evaluated them, it gives you an opportunity to identify key themes within the topic that you're analyzing, and those themes now will inform the structure of the literature review that you're going to write, and then you need to sit down and write the literature review. Okay, I'll just put a key point across this. that these things will not happen automatically. They're not going to happen on their own. You need to deliberately set aside time. You need to plan the time when you're going to be collecting these publications. Of course, you can initially set aside time to identify the key sources in your area. Is it science databases? Is it internet databases? Is it company data that you are going to be working on, whatever, company sources? You need to set time to identify where your literature is going to come from. You have to be deliberate about it. Secondly, you need to put in time to evaluate what you are getting. I'm going to just outline some of the approaches that I found to work quite well for me. You evaluate them. Again, you can have a layered approach to this evaluation. And then you sit down, you read them, you go through them. And for you to have this nice structured approach to doing it, you need to be very well organized. And I'll give a few pointers as we go. And through this process of evaluating sources, reading them, setting them aside, organizing them, reading them, summarizing them, and so on and so forth, you start to identify key themes in the topic that you are studying. As an example, if you are going to be looking at the combustion behavior of a power station or boiler or something like that, you quickly start to look at the impact of coal, core calorific value, core chemistry, the type of burner that you are dealing with, air fuel ratios, etc. You start to understand the themes, the general themes around the topic. I'm just giving those as examples. So these themes will now fit into the outline of the structure that you're going to use for your literature review. And then ultimately, armed with the themes and an outline and the summaries that you have developed from your literature search, you can now sit down and populate that outline. And you obviously have a series of drafts that you can develop. And in the process, you can get other people to review your drafts as you finalize them. Okay, so this is a general approach that I think properly represents how one can go about doing a literature study. Okay, so in terms of searching, we've already had a question on sources. My first port of call, maybe this is unique to the work that I do, is always library databases. And the common database that I use is ScienceDirect. There's nothing that stops you from using Novell or Scopus or whatever works best for you. You can use that as a starting point. Okay, Web of Science, etc. There are so many different library databases that you can use for your initial, search of literature. There are also internet databases, things like ResearchGate, Academia, and so on and so forth. There are so many of them. You can use those also for searching. You can also go beyond that into books and theses. I'm just putting a few examples here, like Trove, WorldCat, finding theses, and also the UJ databases for theses and dissertations and so on. You can also use those. They have got their different uses. In my view, if you are starting to research in something that is completely new that you're not familiar with, at times you want to get a good book that you can read to get yourself up to speed with the fundamental theory around the topic and so on. And some of the theses also have got very good literature review that has been done in a particular topic. So if you can get a good thesis, part of the literature review is already covered there. You can start from there. So depending on where you are starting off, books could be a good starting point in terms of understanding the fundamentals. So we can look at books in different ways. You can look at books which are like textbook type books, or you can look at research monographs, that you can also use to get a deeper understanding of the theories around a particular topic. Internet databases are quite quick, but I need just to put a disclaimer there so that some of the information, I'm sure some of you have experienced this, that you get onto ResearchGate, you do a search, you get a publication, but can't tell where it was published. My approach is, if I can't tell where it was published, I'm not going to cite it. I can read it to try to see whether there's anything useful out of it, but in terms of citing it, I'll be very careful not to cite something that I don't know where it was published. So a good, valid source of initial literature study would be our library databases. Maybe under internet sources, this is where maybe you can have company data. If you're looking at the performance of Eskom, the information that is published on the Eskom database is well verified, so that would be a valid source. If you're looking at standards, let's say researching standards for registration of engineers, you go to the EXRA website. You don't necessarily need to cite the website. You can go in and look at a particular published document, the standard that you can cite. So there's this multi-layer approach to literature review that you need to be careful about. So at the top here, I've just indicated, I know most of you would have done training with the library, in terms of how to access information, what research tools to use, and so on and so forth. I'm just highlighting at the bottom here that you typically want to look at the databases A to Z. I mean, there are lots of them. You can go and look at them. But also of critical importance is the journals A to Z. If you know the key publishers in your area in terms of the journals, you can just go in and identify the journal and start to look at the publications that are coming out in that particular journal. It's a bit more focused, but it's always good to look at what is happening in a particular publication like a journal. When you go into Science Direct and you do your search, I was just searching here socio-economic impacts of solar energy, because there's some master student who's working on this. When I search, you can see obviously I've got 2,254 results related to this. And this is where your critical analysis really needs to kick in. You don't want to read 2,254 publications. You want to select what is important. So my approach, and the approach that I ask my students to do, is always start with the current year. What has been published in the current year? And this 2,254 are only publications for 2024. Okay, but it's not all that are relevant. So you need to be careful in terms of how you select the publications. So obviously, if you go to 2023, you've got 2,700. But of course, you can also refine and adjust the advanced search to reduce the number of these things. So I just put it the keywords the way they are. And already on this front page, I can see two very critical, important, publications that I want to look at. So at this stage, I'm just looking at the topic. Once I've seen the topic and the title and it's relevant, I can then just download it and put it aside. I don't need to read it now. I just download it, put it aside for future reading. So you want to separate these tasks so that you don't overwhelm yourself. Do a systematic search. Look at the different journals. Here's results in engineering. I can look at another journal here, atmospheric environment. I can check other journals and so on. Have a broad search in terms of where the publications are coming from. That's my approach. I download them and I put them in a particular folder on my machine. Okay. I haven't started reading them yet. So that's the first starting point. I just look at the publication. If you want to do two layers at the same time, you can open this. Right? When you have opened it, It gives you obviously the heading and the abstract, and you can also read that abstract to get a sense of whether this is really important to what is this really important to what I'm doing, I'm studying. So if I read this, I start to see what is happening within what these guys have done and so on and so forth. Land use, solar resource, wind resource, optimization, etc. And if this is something that I think I'm interested in, then we can download. But I generally prefer to use a layered approach to this. I sit down, let's say in a week, I'm able to go through, let's say, maybe 20 sources. I sit down, I identify these sources starting this year, going back maybe 5 years, put them aside. And then I allocate time to go through those publications. So the searching, like I indicated, you have to go through the different sources that you have identified. And the evaluation process, like I've indicated in the previous slide, can be layered. Initially, you can evaluate based on the topic, just look at the topic, or you can look at the abstract. But of course, the starting point is having the appropriate keywords in terms of the study area that you're working in. You choose those appropriate keywords and you use them to do your search. So the first level is to look at the relevance of the topic. If it's relevant, then you read the abstract to assess relevance of the study to your work. If the study is relevant, you download the article, you put it aside, and then you set aside time to read the article. And that allocated time, you then read the article and you summarize that article. And for you to be able to do that in a way that is controlled, that is measured, that is easy to follow, you need to be well organized in managing this particular process. So my approach is I've got a folder that I'm working on as impact of solar energy on my machine in a particular research folder, for example. Under there, I have a folder that says unread papers. So I download them into that folder. A folder next to it will be read papers. And then within that folder, we have a Word document with summaries. I prefer to use Word. If you want to use Mendeley or any RefWorks or any of these reference tools and so on, you're welcome to do that. But I find I find myself having better control. If I read a paper, I summarize it myself. I'm going to show you examples of how to summarize them. I summarize them myself. I pick the key issues from the paper that are relevant to my work. I don't need to capture everything. That's why I generally discourage people from trying to do cut and paste of an abstract, because it might lack the detail that you require for your own work. Okay. So you then sit down, you read it, and you have some kind of a system, organized system for managing these things. Okay. So outline here, you look at keywords, your title, your abstract, you look at, if you're still not sure, read the introduction, read the conclusions. It gives you an idea before you dig into to read the paper. In my experience, there are certain papers that you can read once, but in the majority of cases that I really want to use that are critical to my work, I always read them twice, 3 times, even 4 times if necessary, to properly understand. Especially if it's a key paper in the area that I'm studying, I've got to really go into it in detail. But reading the introduction and conclusions will give you a sense of what was done and what was found from the work. And then, of course, you have to download, organize your articles the way you think works best for you. And then you read the article, you summarize that article. I'm going to show you examples of how you summarize this. And I don't want to underemphasize the need to be well organized in terms of managing the literature study. It's very, very critical for you to be organized. So in summarizing the article, there are certain guiding questions that, of course, for me now it's second nature. But if you're starting out to do this, just tick off these questions. When you are reading a particular paper, you need to identify who did the work. That's the first question. Secondly, what did they do? How did they do it? And what results did they find? And what did they conclude? Okay. So if you can answer those 5 questions, you've got a good summary of that particular paper. Okay. This avoids, of course, most of this information is not sitting in the introduction part of the paper. So when you've read the introduction, you know, okay, it's good enough. You don't necessarily need to go and read the introduction again. You know, although it gives you, you know, literature review and so on, but you want to go and focus on what work was done and how the work was done and what results were obtained and what conclusions were drawn from that particular work. Okay. And I always encourage at the end of that summary, add a statement on what you think about the work. Okay. Is it comprehensive enough? The results, you know, properly linked to the conclusions? Is it a key finding in the area? Is it something that covers everything, or there are gaps that have not been covered, which you can cover? For example, if I'm looking at a paper that is looking at the impact of solar and is focused on socio-economic on solar in the agricultural sector, definitely it's not covering the mining sector, for example. It's not covering general domestic environment and so on and so forth. So you need to keep your eye out of that so that you start to see where the gaps are in the literature. So every summary must be accompanied by what you think about the work, your own opinion, your own views, your critical assessment of the paper that you have read. And it requires you again to take very deliberate action or effort to make sure you do that. Okay, so I hope this helps. This is just to give you an example. I'm extracting this from one of my undergraduate students. This is the beginning of this year. I always ask them, before you write a proposal, go and look for 20 journal articles, okay, and summarize them in 2 weeks. So this is the first effort. I don't give them a guide in terms of what they should do. They just go and do it. Then I start to guide them in terms of what they should do. So even structure, I don't tell them how to structure. I just tell them I want you to summarize, and the summary is not a page. A summary is not an abstract that you cut and paste. A summary should be about 1/3 of a page maximum, so that you just capture the essential elements of that particular publication. So I'm just going to go through this, highlighting some of the important things that you have here. And I'm seeing this in some initial master's submissions and in some cases even PhD submissions, where the reference is put onto a heading. That is a no-no. You are not referencing a heading. You are referencing facts that are coming from a certain source. Okay. So if you remember, one of the first things that I said, you need to identify who did the work. If you find yourself referencing in the heading, then there's something wrong with the way you're writing. You just need to revise it. Okay. So I'll just highlight a few things here. Of course, that reference should not be sitting there. Secondly, it starts off by saying this journal. We all know a journal is not a paper, right? A journal is a compilation of a collection of journal articles. So the language that we use to convey what we are finding is quite important. So you can ignore most of those things that you are seeing in red pen there. But what was important for this student was to understand that he was missing the key technical detail of the paper, how the work was done, although he's talking in general the methodology and so on, but the technical elements of the work that was done is completely missing. Now, if you look at the same student a couple of months later, you can see the complete change in terms of the approach to summarizing. Okay. Here he starts off by identifying who did the work with a reference there. By the way, we use a IEEE referencing style in our work. It clearly indicates who did the work. They investigated the effect of divergence angle, and they put the angle details there on the discharge of a Venturi flow meter. The study utilized CFD software to model the Venturi flow meter and compute the permanent and relative pressure losses. What was done? Okay. The study utilized, how was it done? Utilized Venturi flow meter with an inlet and outlet diameter of that and that, and velocity is that, and so on. What results were obtained? The results obtained illustrated that the optimum configuration resulting in a minimum pressure of that was a velocity of 1.36 and angle of that, and so on. We are seeing the results of the work that was done, and the study concluded that a small throat length with a lower angle of divergence produced a minimum pressure loss of maximum differential pressure loss. Okay. There's a bit of some technical issues here. That's why I'm raising this question for him. You need to address this. Despite the findings and conclusions from the research, there was no specific value of the minimum pressure loss. So this is him putting his opinion to say, okay, this work has been done, good stuff, but we are not indicating the specific value of the minimum pressure loss. So which means there's a gap that is there. For undergraduate work, of course, is sufficient. For masters and PhD, we expect you now to critically look at this, the methodology that was used, the results that were obtained, the techniques that were used for measurements, and so on, were they appropriate for the work that was being done. So the level of critical assessment becomes very, very important in terms of summarizing your literature. I tell you, if you go through 20 of these things, like what I ask my students, my undergraduate students, to do, you are already halfway through writing your proposal. Of course, if you go to 30, your proposal will be quite solid. But 20 journal sources without any of these internet sources and whatever, you will set you up for a very good, write-up in terms of your proposal. Okay. For a master's project, obviously, for our undergraduate students, by the time that they finish this work that they are doing now, which is sometime in October, they would have now cited maybe close to between 60 and 80. Generally, for masters, we expect maybe something around 80, and for PhDs, obviously, something more than 100. But these numbers are not cast in concrete. What is important is the content that is being conveyed and the understanding of the topic and the highlight of the gaps that you are picking up from the literature. Okay, I just put this here to highlight one common, I do not call it common mistake, but one habit that most people who are doing literature review have. Of course, I'm highlighting the issue of abbreviations. They need to be defined and so on. But one common habit is to cite the same source several times in the same paragraph. As a matter of fact, some of the journals that we publish with are now requesting there's this, citing this the same source several times in the paragraphs, or citing several sources on the same point. Let's say, for example, here we might have 4 or 5 numbers at this particular point. Certain journals are saying, no, we don't want that. If you are citing specific information, we need to be able to track where that information is coming from. So you need to be specific in terms of where the information is coming from. That's why this approach to summarizing, where you indicate where the information is coming from and so on and so forth, as you read this, there's no confusion as to where that information is coming from. And this is what some journals are now requesting. If you find yourself citing the same source here 5 times in the same paragraph, that needs to be revised. Obviously, you want to be focusing on the important stuff. If you find yourself doing this, just change the way you are writing, and everything will be sorted. So you summarize these things in the way that I've indicated. Capturing the critical information is very important in any literature study. So when you have then summarized this, if you're doing a proposal, I suggest for a master's or a PhD, I suggest you look at sources between 20 and 30. for undergraduate, undergraduate honors programs. For a proposal, we expect between 15 and 20 sources for a proposal, but obviously when the work is done, there's quite a bit that is expected. All right, I'm just looking at courses note there, just reminding you that the session is recorded, and any resources that I'm using here will be shared with you. Okay. So having gone through your literature review and summarized some sources, you would have picked at least the most critical information, which is the trends and the patterns in your topic. What concepts are recurring in your study? For example, if you're looking at simulations, what kind of simulation tools are being used? What kind of accuracy of results are being found, and so on and so forth. The key theories and major study areas, start to crystallize what is happening in that topic. Where researchers agree and where researchers disagree, it becomes evident, that as far as the utility of a certain research tool or research methodology is concerned, it is agreed that it provides some good results. Okay, so where are researchers agreeing and where are researchers disagreeing? That should be quite clear. And what should be clear also is what is missing from literature, and we call those research gaps. Where are the gaps in your literature? And once you have clarified these things, you should then be ready to set the key themes for your study. Right, so which raises the question, when do I stop? When do I stop with this literature review? You cannot just go on and on and on. You need to set targets for yourself. We've got certain guidelines. If I'm given a master's, I look at it and I see this guy has cited only 20 sources, I start to raise questions. Do 20 courses for a master's or a PhD really demonstrate someone's understanding of a research topic? And obviously, the more you start to read it and to understand, you already have an opinion, and you can see whether that opinion is reinforced, that hypothesis is reinforced or not. You already are for it to making your decision. So there's no specific number, but one can look at a certain literature review that has been done, and you can quickly make an opinion on whether you think this is sufficient or not in a certain study area. So for like I said, for proposals, I have certain guidelines that I expect from a master's proposal, a PhD proposal. Even an undergrad proposal, I give them targets to say you need to, because this is the starting point of any research work, you need to have journal sources, so many in your proposal, so that they start off on a good note. And if they do that at the beginning, it makes it easy in terms of developing their mini dissertation work. And when you're looking at your at the themes, there might be just a general theme that is applicable to your field, and there might be also some themes, but in there would be key issues that will arise that you need to be able to identify. And obviously, if you have gone through the proper summaries, looking at what people are doing, looking at what is missing, and so on, you come up with research gaps that you need to focus on and address. Right, the outline of the literature review, again, it depends on what one is doing, and not just what you're doing, your choice in terms of the approach that you want to take. We talk about this funnel approach to literature review. You start general, but based on your themes, you start to narrow down to a specific issue that you are dealing with in your research. I'm going to talk about the structure later on, but the general part, we establish, the general issues around the topic. As you look at the theories, the work that was done by other people and so on, you start to narrow down to specific issues. And there are generally these 4 approaches to structuring a literature review. It can be chronological in terms of the development of the field of the theories in the area. So we're just looking at time-based. Obviously, depending on the topic, it might be something that is spanning centuries. So you have to be careful if you decide to do that, so that you just don't end up listing things. Or it could be thematic. You are looking at the themes that that have dominated a particular, study area. Or you could look at methods, different methods that have been used to address a particular issue, their effectiveness in that, and so on and so forth. Or you can be looking at the development of the theory in general without looking at it in a chronological fashion. So, but you can also have a mixture of, you can have a sort of like a hybrid approach where you look at the theoretical development together with time. We use this quite a lot when you're studying fracture mechanics. You always want to look at the foundation of what happened around 1900. But you want to establish the fundamental theory. And based on that fracture mechanics theory that was established then, you can just quickly jump into the current theories and so on and so forth, which are building up on what happened at that particular time. So this is a good sort of like framework, if I can call it that, in terms of developing and establishing your literature review. So whether you want to do thematic or time-based is really up to you. You need to choose what to do. But in either way, you want to sort of like start general to give context, and then you narrow down to the specific issues that you're dealing with. Okay. Right, then you have to sit down and write your literature review. For you to write, you must have some kind of an outline that you can use. You then populate that outline. Generally, you start general, as I have indicated. You narrow down to specifics, and you use, in doing this, you use your literature review. And this is where my approach that I mentioned earlier on then comes in handy. I've got a Word document that I use, which has got summaries of the literatures. At the end of that document, I have already captured in the sources in the particular referencing style that I'm using, IEEE in general. Now, if I open that document of summaries, and I'm now opening my thesis or proposal document, I can easily share the references. I don't need to retype them. I only type them when I capture a particular paper, identify that it's relevant. As I start to read it, I capture the references because I have already confirmed that it's an important, document for my work. Okay, so if I open it as I'm writing now my thesis with this document or summaries open next to it, I can easily share references. I don't need to retype them. Okay, so I find that works very well for me. So your summaries are now feeding into the structure and the outline that you have prepared for your literature review. Once you have done, it's always a good idea, if even myself, I do it, to get someone to review your draft, especially if it's a first draft. Get someone to read it. We always make mistakes. If possible, I prefer to get someone who is not in my field, someone who is outside, who can question things without necessarily understanding what I'm trying to do. The moment you get those questions coming through, you are able to critically think about them and address them. But more importantly, language. The person who is not into your work will be able to look at the language very easily and be able to suggest corrections, and so on. Right, so that's the general outline. If you are looking at the structure in general, it looks like this. This is global. It's not specific to any particular. This is just generic. That critical review, literature review chapter. I'm talking about chapter now, but it doesn't have to be, a literature review chapter. You always start with background remarks where you outline the contents of the chapter. What does the chapter cover? And then you give some kind of an introduction or background to the problem, where you introduce the field of study. I use that approach to give definition to certain thematic concepts that might not be generally known. So I use that background to properly define the key, terms that are used in the work. And then it doesn't have to be like this, but usually that general that introduction will be followed by a theoretical foundation. You give theoretical background to the work that you're going to be doing, and then you do critical review. Now I'm putting critical review here. Your document should never read critical review. It should never be a critical review. Within the way you are telling the story, it will be easy to tell that this section is covering theoretical foundation, this is a background, and this is covering critical review of literature. In short, you are summarizing the individual studies with certain signposts to say, okay, this is looking at the effect of CV, this is looking at this effect of moisture, that's looking at the effect of insulation, ambient conditions, and so on and so forth. And of course, as I have indicated, some kind of critique of the work. Is it really comprehensive in the work? What do you think about the results that have been obtained? Okay, so although I'm outlining here the key segments of what you expect in a literature review, they can have any topic, any heading, if I can put it like that. As a matter of fact, for PhD work, you don't necessarily need to have a chapter that is called literature review. Okay, your literature review could be conducted on a thematic kind of approach, to say impact of calorific value on banner performance or something like that, and you do a literature review which is covering that. And you do another one, impact of ambient conditions or fuel quality on the banner performance, and you do a literature review on that theme. So your chapters could be thematic, but I know in most cases we just put a chapter called literature review, which is still fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not mandatory to have a chapter called literature review, unless your supervisor says, yeah, we'll go with literature review to avoid any confusion. Then you can do that. So this is the main body of your literature review. And then at the end of the literature review, you must now crystallize what you are getting from that literature. And this should be linked to the work that you are going to do. So I always ask my students to add here summary of key literature findings at the end of the literature. And this should be bulleted. I prefer it bulleted because it crystallizes issues. So say, based on the literature review conducted, the following findings are made, put bullet 1, you put the point. It could be, for example, the range of pressures that are typically used is 20 to 30 megapascals. It's a crystallized finding from literature. Typical furnace temperatures sit between 600 and 800 degrees Celsius. That's a key finding that crystallizes what performance parameters you are getting from these units. So it's important to crystallize these things, and these findings will then feed into your research methodology or your experiments, your modeling, and so on and so forth. So it's really critical to really crystallize this. Don't just do literature review and end there. Summarize what you're finding from that literature. To me, that is important because that is the purpose of conducting a literature review, to aid in the further work that you're going to do, for you to build on what other people are doing in that research space. Okay, so what I've covered so far is just an outline of how one can do a literature review and what are the critical elements that you need to cover when you're doing a literature review. Without doing a literature review, you cannot write an introduction. You cannot write the literature review. So you can look at, as I've indicated, the different layers on how you can conduct this. Ending up with, for me, the most important thing is to have summarized. The process of summarizing reinforces your understanding of the issues in that particular field. So it will be very easy then for you to demonstrate that understanding and your own views in terms of the topic that you're studying. Okay, so when it comes to writing a literature review, again, if you are doing, writing an introduction, if you are going to do a proposal, or even if you're going to write a literature review or whatever it is that you're writing, you need to have some kind of summaries of literature. So the starting point really for me is do, as you can see here on bullet number 3, it's sort of like a content of the main body of a proposal. We need to have some kind of a brief literature review that justifies the topic that you're working on. Okay, I'm just putting here, typically what you would have as the front matter and the back matter in a particular, document or proposal. But once you have read a number of papers, you'll then be able to establish a proper background to your work. It becomes clear what are the key issues that are arising in your field of study. Why are people going solar, and so on. You need to be giving that solid background, which is literature based. It's not your opinions. It's coming from evidence that is coming from literature. Secondly, when you have done that, the problem statement becomes very clear. Okay, this is simplified for undergraduate students, but for masters, you need to have a clear problem statement, masters and PhD, and you need to have very clear research questions that arise from your research study. Based on the gaps that you have, the initial gaps that you have identified, you need to crystallize the problem that you are trying to address. As an example, the example that I've been just giving, because of the deterioration in core quality, there's a need to investigate the performance of conventional steam boilers in the production of steam, or whatever it is that you're working on. So the problem is clear, and you can provide literature-based evidence that there is a need for that particular problem, and the problem is clear. And then you indicate your research questions, which will lead then to the aim of your work and the objectives of your work, the scope of the work. I've left out here, I've put hypothesis of the work. You can add another stuff in between there. What are you expecting to get? I always insist that people should include some kind of a brief literature review that highlight the problem, that show that this issue is being researched on, and this is what people are finding, and these are where the gaps are from literature to justify that that work. And then you have a high-level scientific methodology that is presented, and then you put up your significance of the research. Why is it important? And when I'm talking about significance, we're looking at it generally in 3 aspects. Significance to applications, significance to society, or it could be environment, and of course significance to the body of knowledge. Like I said, if it's a thesis, we are expecting a contribution to the body of knowledge. There must be something new that is coming out of that work. And then of course you need to have a project plan, and that plan needs to be practical. It needs to be something that you can implement, that you can follow. If you can't follow that plan, then it's meaningless, it's useless. And this is where some of the panic will then come in. You have prepared a plan, you're not following it. Before you know it, you're already sitting at the point where you need to be able to submit, and you've run out of time. So preparing a plan and working that plan is quite important at any stage of your research work, whether it's the literature review, any write-up that you're making. Prepare a plan and work that plan. Is quite critical. And by the way, as you are writing this, there is I always ask people to prepare a storyline. There's a storyline that is behind any research, and you need to use that storyline create a narrative or a narration of your work that is interesting to the reader and that is clear, that is easy to follow, that is easy to understand. I'm giving an example of the core quality decrease in Mpumalanga there. It's a known fact. Documented. The CV of core is decreasing. The amount of sand that is in the core is increasing. Some people have been talking about our boilers now burning real estate instead of core because of this challenge. Therefore, there's going to be an impact because of this change of CV on the performance of our core generating plants. So what do we need to do? Given this variation in CV, we need to be able to investigate to check how the CV affects the performance of the boiler. And there are a number of those that are familiar with the power plants. There's a number of factors that come into play. For example, flame out. What CV of CV value would lead to the flame out of the boiler? That's a research question. What CV value would lead to an efficiency drop, let's say, of 10 percentage points? It's a research question that is coming out of this. And as you create your aim to model the performance of the boiler and so on and so forth, you now have this storyline to say, once I've modeled this, I expect A, B, and C to happen. The tools that I'm going to use are these, based on literature. This one is used that tool, that one is used that tool, that one is used that tool. The most effective tool used seems to be this, and I want to modify it because in that previous work they failed to use a certain, they did not investigate a certain turbulence model in their simulation of combustion, and so on. That's what I'm going to use, and so on and so forth. So your storyline becomes very, very clear. There's a continuous string in your presentation. It's not disjointed. You don't want to start by looking at one a problem here. In the middle, you are switching to something that is talking about smart things and so on, which is not connected to the original objective that you have set for yourself or the original aim. So everything that you do behind, there's this string, this storyline that needs to come out even through your literature review. The structure of your literature review must be something that someone can easily read and follow and be able to understand the work that you are doing. And if it's like that, it becomes so interesting even to read documents which are written in that kind of way. Okay, so that sort of like summarizes what I prepared for today. So as I'm closing, I just want to highlight these points that literature review is not something that you can wish away. It's an integral and critical part of any research. I've had cases where students would jump into, well, the moment they register, they start to do modeling, experiments, and so on and so forth. They've got some results. Whether they know those results have been done by other people or not, they don't know. But they are now under pressure to submit, and then you ask them, okay, where's the literature review? It becomes a problem. They now want to run to look for literature that supports the work that they have done. So literature review is critical and integral to any postgraduate study. As a matter of fact, we can just extend it to any scientific research study. It's important to understand what other researchers are doing, what methods they are using, what results they are finding, and what conclusions are they are making, and where are the gaps in terms of the research that needs to be done. And when you conduct a literature review, it enables you then to demonstrate your critical familiarity with an understanding of the topic, and of course the scholarly context in which that topic is being done. In the process, you are also able to crystallize your own ideas around that research topic and what needs to be done, to contribute to advancing that particular area that you're studying or working on. A good literature review needs to be properly planned, deliberately executed. I need to underline deliberate here. You cannot just wish it away, that I wish it has happened. You have to be deliberate in terms of planning it. You've got to be deliberate in terms of executing it, and you've got to be deliberate in terms of the way you write. You've got a lot of support in terms of writing and so on. It always amazes me that at times when I read masters and PhD thesis, you at some point you start to wonder why all of a sudden someone who is doing postgraduate studies completely forgets what a sentence is or what a paragraph is, despite some teachers knocking it in our heads that a paragraph should be one idea. You start to see a paragraph that spans 1.5 pages, and you say, okay, what's happening here? Is it we completely forgotten how to communicate properly, clearly, so that it's easy for the reader to understand. Therefore, if you want to do a good literature review, you need to plan the work for the literature and you need to work that plan. I don't think there's any other way to do it. You might talk about AI, use of AI in terms of writing ChatGPT, in terms of writing literature review and so on. Well, I mean, it gives you ideas in terms of what are the key issues around, but in terms of writing a proper literature review, it's not very helpful. If you really want to write a literature review, and the ChatGPTs, I see students are using them, and you read the first sentence, you know that this is AI generated. It's so easy to pick. So besides, it doesn't build you, it doesn't build your knowledge. It's important to work through this literature review and be able to get it. You can use those tools to support your literature study, but don't let them do the literature study for you. Okay, and then of course, if you're going to write an introduction, a proposal, or whatever, the key for me is that you need to do a good literature review. You need to summarize good literature papers. You don't need to read everything, but you need to deliberately choose which papers properly represent the work that is being done in your field. Starting this year, for example, already a lot of work has been done. Going to last year, if you go 5-10 years selecting the best papers in that year, you're on your way to doing a very good, postgraduate research. So thank you very much. I'll stop here for now and invite questions if there are any questions or comments. Also, if there are any comments. I see, is it two? Yeah, Phumudzo, you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, colleagues.
Good afternoon.
A question from my side is regarding the research methodology. At the beginning of the research proposal, or when you submit your first proposal, I submitted my advanced research proposal this month and I presented last week. The feedback was hammering more on my research methodology, that it was vague. It didn't come across as if it was well thought. Everything else seemed to have been okay, except the research methodology, and that is what I have to work on. So I think the question is really just to say, when you are working on this very first document of your proposal, how deep should you go into the research methodology? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phumudzo. And it's a very critical issue, especially when you're writing your introduction. I'm not sure which field you are in, Phumudzo, but I'm going to talk in general. The research methodology at the beginning, we tend to want to put a step-by-step approach to it, describing it step by step, and so on. Generally, what is expected there, I will use the word high level in quotation marks, but you're looking for a high level scientific approach to solving the problem. But I know, of course, if people are doing surveys, they want to use you to select the tool that you're using for the survey, the kind of questions and so on and so forth. So in the space that I am in, what we need there is a high level scientific approach that is going to be used to do the investigation. The detailed step-by-step and detailed mechanics and so on are then presented generally in chapter 3, where you do your research methodology, you can do the details. At the proposal stage, we want to see a high-level scientific methodology. But again, it depends on which field you are working in. If you are going to do interviews and surveys, they really want to know what tools are you going to use, how are you going to identify the researchers or the participants to the research. They want to know how you are going to analyze the data, how you are going to store the data, and so on and so forth. Why they want it at that stage is because if you are going to be dealing with people with interviews and so on, you need to receive an ethical clearance. And your proposal is the document that you're going to submit for ethical clearance. So it will then be important to put in those issues, to cover all those issues, when you do your proposal. So it depends on the topic that you're working on, but your supervisor generally is able to guide you to say, okay, at this stage, what are our requirements in terms of methodologies, this and this and that. So in the space that I am, Phumuzo, we are looking at the high-level scientific methodology that is going to be used to investigate the problem. Okay, let me check if we have got... Right, Phumuzo, I'm not sure whether it's a new end.
No, I just wanted to say thanks and to respond. I'm doing Master in Engineering Management, so I'm in engineering.
Yes,
Thanks.
yes, engineering management. So I'm not sure they're going to be doing surveys as well.
Yes, I intend to be doing surveys, interviews. That's how I want to
So in that case, you need to explicitly indicate the tool that you're using. You need to indicate your methodology must be properly thought out. You need to have looked at the different techniques that are there, what kind of questions you're going to be asking, and so on and so forth. Because when it comes to ethics application, you need that. And the ethics people want to look at the risks. So they are not going to be able to identify the risks if it's a general scientific description. It needs to be a bit more specific so that they can say, okay, there is no possible harm to the university if this work goes ahead. So that's really the point. John Switzer, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. With respect to undergrad dissertations, roughly how many research questions can a topic have? Say a student is designing a conveyor system which is carrying coal from a coal mine to, say, a power station. How many research questions are limits us?
Yeah, okay, for undergraduate, if it's design, for me, the focus is on customer requirements. What does the customer require? So if it's design, I always insist, I need to understand, to see a statement that represents the client requirement. What does the client want? But we also have undergraduate research projects, like the one that I was giving you those samples. In that case, there needs to be a research question. And because there we've got research, and typically you want to limit the number of questions maybe to 3. About 3 questions will be sufficient, but it depends. It's not cast in concrete. It depends on the nature of the work that is being done. But roughly 3 research questions are important. For PhDs and masters, I generally don't advise them to have questions that are more than 5. Because at the end, when I read a thesis, I will look at the research questions and I'll go to the end, to the conclusions chapter, and see whether each one of those questions has been answered. So if the questions have not been answered, they're just there to occupy space, then it becomes a problem. So generally, about 5 research questions for masters and PhD. Undergrad, I wouldn't go beyond 3 because they are still under development as well. I hope that answers the question, Shidzai.
Thank you. Can I make a follow-up?
Please, yeah.
In the evaluation or assessment of graduate attributes, say in chapter 1, when you are talking about the research questions, if the students outline what the problem is and how it's going to solve the problem, can we use that as an assessment as a preliminary assessment for graduate attribute 1 problem solving?
It's covering only part of the GA, identifying the problem. Because when you look at the scientific problem-solving methodology, you then need to identify criteria for selecting the solution, developing at least 3 different options, applying those criteria and identifying the best solution, and then implementing that particular solution. That then becomes problem solving. So identifying a problem and just highlighting that, it's the way that I'm going to solve it, does not really cover all the elements of GA1. So you need more than just defining a problem and saying this is how I'm going to solve it.
Thank you, Prof.
All right, Simo, over to you.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Good afternoon.
I just maybe I don't know if will you be able to assist me on this one. So I'm currently doing my honors in civil engineering. So in one of the projects that we're working on this year, we are supposed to be doing a lab work, but now due to some of the materials not being available, so now our project is solely based on literature review. So we have to do everything just by research and reading what other people have done. So in that context, then how do you normally approach such project in terms of just doing everything, even if now to critically review what the findings from other researchers, and then try and bring it into your own project, and then from there you have to sort of compare what might have been your findings and what already existed. So how do you normally approach such studies?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, but I'm aware. I'm not sure that particular program that you're referring to is accredited by EXA.
Yes.
If it is, then you run into problems. I know of one institution that ran into problems on that. That they were saying we are teaching students to do literature review only, but there's a specific requirements of a major project in the standard for that honors program. So when EXA comes and sees that kind of evidence, it might raise challenges. The general approach would be, okay, we've had problems with procurement and so on. We can reconstitute the project. Instead of the experiment, we move on to simulation, and this happens quite a lot. We move on to simulation with the validation coming from published experimental results. I'm not sure whether that's making sense.
No, it does make sense.
Yeah, so that is not just literature review.
Okay.
There is some element of you generating data, analyzing the data, and arriving at conclusions. So that's generally the approach, but I don't know the context in terms of exactly what that problem that you're referring to entails, but it cannot be only literature review.
Just maybe if I can give you a sort of a brief background, so that it's more on construction materials. So we have to look at the roller compacted concrete, but now using a substitute for cement and for fine aggregates. But now we cannot find the substitute for fine aggregates. So due to that, we can't do lab work. So now we have to try and get the literature that support maybe that has been done before in relation to that to those substitute for fine aggregates, and then from there we have to sort of develop our own findings.
Are you going to do analysis on your own findings? For example, if the aggregate was the fine aggregate was supposed to be 100 micron, for argument's sake, if you change it to 50 micron, what impact is going to have? Are you able to do some analysis on the impact of particle size change?
We have to do that, but now I don't know how to approach it because we can't go to the lab. So how do we use the data that's available to do that analysis?
Yeah, maybe from what is published and the theoretical models that are out there, you can then start to predict what could happen if you change the fine aggregate.
Okay.
Okay, so it's still possible, but it cannot be just literature review, but you are using data that is published in literature to do your analysis. In that case, it's fine.
Okay. All right.
All right. Thanks, Tebogo.
Thanks.
Simon, Tebogo, over to you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, Tebogo.
Yes, my question is just based on how do you strike a balance between doing a literature, like reviewing other people's work based on your topic of study, and not trying to give out some form of a lecture, in the sense that, let's say, for argument's sake, taking back to the example you gave of socio-economic impacts of solar energy. Let's say that is what you are researching on. So how do you maintain a balance and not try to give a lecture of what is socio-economic issues, what is solar, what is energy, and find yourself delving into things that may be trivial, or rather, let me say, obvious for everyone, and then not turning your whole literature into like some form of a lecture or a chapter in a textbook, which will be providing such information. Like, how do you get the balance between that? Because from time to time, we get tempted to just like define most of these terms and then just plug them into the literature, and then miss out on critical information. So the question is just, how do you get a good balance of ensuring that your concepts are well defined, and also you also have tangible literature from other studies?
Yeah, that's a trick one, but it's something that you have to do. I want to connect this with the question from Patience there, who says, how many pages are required for a PhD thesis literature review, and can we publish an article from our literature? So answering the last question, definitely. As a matter of fact, if I've got a student who is really fresh into research and publishing, the first thing that I ask them to do is to prepare a review paper. And there are different papers. A review paper on your literature. So you do this literature, detailed literature review. You prepare a review paper that summarizes others, methodologies, key findings, techniques, theories, and so on in your area. You do a review paper and you publish that. That can be a first step in terms of building your publication profile. So how many pages should you have? In a journal paper, on average, I would say between 50 and 20 pages is a journal paper. Even if it's a review, you're sitting around there. If it's 6 pages, 10 pages, usually a conference paper. So journal papers may be average, I would say 20, depending again on the field of study, I would say 20 pages. When you're looking at a PhD thesis, it's about 120 pages. That's what is expected. roughly 120 pages. Again, it's not cast in concrete. We are not going to count, say, 1, 2, 3 up to 120, therefore it's fine. 1, 2, 3 up to 119, therefore it's not fine. It's not, that's not the point. It's a guideline. So having that kind of guideline, you then start to quickly see that your literature review will be sitting between 40 and 60 pages or something like that. Again, it's not cast in concrete, depending also on the type of work that you are doing, the amount of work that is involved, etc. So it gives you that general guideline. So, given that what I've just said in terms of PhD, Tebogo, I've had a case where one PhD students gave me a literature review with 350 pages. Okay. And immediately I say, no, I'm not going to go through this. You need to go and scale it down. Okay. So there are these guidelines to say when you're doing a literature review, should it be 400 pages? If you produce literature review of 400 pages, how much is your final thesis going to be? And which examiner is willing to sit down and read 600, 700 pages of a thesis? I tell you, no one. So the guidelines are there to give us that guide. So it means that if you're going to be working with 40 pages for a PhD thesis, I'm just using this as an arbitrary example, Tebogo, you obviously need to give context to the work that you're working on. You need to have some kind of an introduction, defining certain not well understood concepts and so on, giving an outline, not a detailed derivation of the theory, an outline of the theory and so on. You can start to see that you're working with maybe something around 10 pages or so. Okay, so it limits you, but the main control should be what are you trying to achieve. You are not trying to write a textbook. You're not trying to reproduce a textbook. If someone wants detailed knowledge on a particular topic, they can go and get a textbook and read it. So here you're trying to outline the theory in support of your research work. So that is where the balance comes in. You then need to strike that balance between providing sufficient background without necessarily being trivial. I mean, you cannot say, give me an equation, mass is equal to, or force is equal to mass times acceleration. That is too trivial at postgraduate level. Even at undergrad final year level, it's a bit too trivial. So you need to deliberately think critically about what you are trying to present and prepare an outline that allows you to communicate what you want to communicate without necessarily converting your literature review into a lecture on something. You want to outline and focus on where the challenges are, what people are doing, what are the findings, what are the key issues. Okay. I hope that answers your question. I see there's another question also in the Tebogo. If I've not answered, you can follow up. Okay, the slides are going to be shared. I'm going to share them with Kosen is going to share them. The same thing with the recording, I think. Okay. Right. How many PhD? No, I'm not. I'm not saying you should first write a literature review. No, I'm saying you need to do a literature study. Okay, writing a literature review chapter is a different story. I'm saying you need to do literature review in terms of identifying relevant papers, reading them, summarizing them, and so on, and then you can write your proposal. That's what I'm communicating, not to say you have to write the literature review chapter first, no. Okay, I hope that answers the question. John Rizai, I'm not sure whether it's an odd end or it's a follow-up question.
So I think it's an old end.
It's an odd end, okay. And Tebogo, I hope you answered, Tebogo. Nkosi, there's a question there in terms of the timing of the distribution of the material.
Yes, Prof, we will provide all the materials by end of tomorrow, business day tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. All right, any other questions or comments? Yeah, minimum number of minimum number of, there's no specific minimum number of papers for literature review, but there's just a guideline. You know, when you with time you start to get a sense of how many papers should you go through to be able to have a fair understanding of what's happening in a particular field of study. So if I'm reading a master's thesis, I'm looking at, references around 80, but I've seen some get up to 100 and so on. But again, that's a guideline. You can have 60, you can have 70, you can have 90, or whatever it is, somewhere around there. I've seen thesis with 120 papers reviewed and so on, the paper cited, etc. So it just gives you a guide. If it's a thesis, a PhD thesis, I'm looking at 100 or so on. If you have properly read those things, about 8 of them, you really understand the topic. So this is why the other, some journal papers are now saying, we don't want you to do just put numbers for citation. We need you to summarize what has been done by a particular individual or particular researchers and whatever, and give us your critique of the work, because there's a tendency for people to just put numbers instead of reading. So you just look at a paper that has got something in the abstract, and then you say, okay, it's relevant to put it, without necessarily reading that paper. So those numbers of how many papers should I, it's really just a guideline, but the question that should be asking is how many and which papers should I read to get a good understanding of this field? Right, for proposal, if you're doing a master's proposal, maybe around 30. Okay, I hope that answers that question, Meza. Okay, right. I don't see any more hands, Nkosi. We've got 10 minutes to go. But I think if there are no questions, we can call it a day.
Yes, Prof. I don't see any question from the chat as well as the hands. I think all the participants are answered by now. If someone still have a question, you may. Okay, I see John. John, is it an odd hand or? John, you may ask a question.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Prof. I don't have any question. I think you have buttressed most on the things that I earlier raised, and also have been able to find a modus operandi with regards to not getting derailed based on creating a plan. No, it's just a comment. I just want to appreciate the time and the opportunity for the faculty to organize such a presentation as this. And I'm very sure I can speak on behalf of other students and academias in the future that we are very, very happy for this opportunity, because quite a lot of us do not necessarily have research experience in the past, and such an awareness that you've created with this presentation and forthcoming videos to go back and look at will give us the confidence and the experience and that level of what would I describe it? The level of aggressiveness to go about it the right way and get things done properly. So I just want to say thank you.
Thank you, John. And I see Brian there. Brian, you can go ahead.
Professor, just want to check here on honors level. you need to do the critical review of the literature, or you can just show that you have gone through the literature review?
No, that's the starting point of research. So we really want you to, the criteria might not be very strict in terms of assessing you, but we really want you to start to do it, because that's when you start to build your research ability. So it's important. We at undergrad we ask our students to do that, and to demonstrate that they can write a literature review, they can critique some of the things that they are finding in literature, because that's the starting point of understanding that whatever is out there is not the gospel truth, but it's something that is evolving, and we can look at it with a critical eye to identify where the shortcomings are and where improvements are required. So we need to start at that particular point. That's the purpose of this major exercise. What it links up to is graduate attribute number 9, I think, being able to develop individually. So if you're able to go and collect information, read it, analyze it, and make an opinion, you are on the way to develop to a lifetime actually of personal development, reading journal papers, reading other articles, attending conferences, presenting, and so on. This is where it starts. So we expect undergraduate students to start to do that, although the criteria for assessment might not be that strict, but it's expected.
Okay, thanks, Prof.
Okay, thanks, Brian. All right, and Kosi, I think we are done. You can wind this up.
Thank you so much, Prof. I think we can call it a day. You have covered so much, and speaking on a student perspective as well, this was very informative session. We really benefited from this. Thank you for your time and delivering such an insightful session, Prof. And to all our participants, thank you so much for making it a possible session. As promised, the materials will be shared by end of business day tomorrow. Look out to modeling communities and be look out to our upcoming workshops regarding the research writing. Thank you so much for your time once again.
Thanks, and good afternoon, everyone. All the best.
Prof, I will just send you an email so that you can send me the presentation slides so that I can share them with all the participants.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.